Virginia. She is one that we call when we want things objective. She is our profound professor here, Professor Sarah Sully, a dean at the Women and Gender Affairs Studies at Makerere University, sociologist, researcher, but also one that thinks about the ordinary Ugandan, and we'll be putting that to perspective. Today, we find challenges, we also seek solutions on our taxation in this country. Let's get this clip, and when we come back, we'll be discussing that and more.
Not just our motto, but a call to action. In our journey as a nation, placing our faith in God remains paramount. We, the citizens, have a social contract with our government. In return, we expect social service delivery in exchange for our collective responsibilities. Every citizen plays a vital role, serving their patriotic duties and contributing through taxes. However, we face challenges like an insufficient tax base and unemployment. Unfair tax assessments, overtaxation, and struggling businesses have become concerns. Tonight, we delve into solutions. Join us as experts discuss tax base expansion and revenue improvement. We bring together a distinguished panel to chat the way forward. Don't miss Behind the Headlines, your weekly insight into Uganda's progress, only on UBC, Inspiring Uganda. Make a date with your public broadcaster and be part of the conversation.
Here, solutions especially to our tax base, the widening, the broadening, all the deepening that is already happening. And I have a panel here that I'll be introducing in a short while there. But our taxation is in two tiers. One, we have government and we have the local government. But we also have administration, that is Uganda Revenue Authority. We have the policymakers, Ministry of Finance. We also have the local government that also does administration there. People question if they have double taxation in there. That's the discussion this evening. You can be part of the show. Go to our Twitter handle, hashtag UBC Behind the Headlines, or go to our YouTube channel. Let your comment be there. Also the number 0709 60 92 25. Drop your drop your text or WhatsApp there and let us know what you think about our tax base and what are the solutions moving forward. Gentlemen, you're very welcome. Most of you, all of you, is your maiden appearance here, and we're really grateful you accepted our gracious invitation to bring you here. Thank you. I will start with Mr. Kagwa, and I think I'll come in that order because Bosa is next to you there. And we have a relationship that we can be able to see. Mr. Kagwa, what qualifies a good taxation policy if we're looking at the Ugandan context?
If you're looking at the Ugandan context, and thank you, good evening, viewers. I'm very excited to be here to talk about the subject that is dear to me, but also that is important to this country because there are no countries that have developed without taxation. So, what is a good tax policy? It is a good tax policy that is equitable, that it's fair, that makes sure that the poor do not bear a disproportionate amount of tax. When you look at in comparison to the rich, it is a tax that is simple to understand by everybody to whom it applies. It is a tax that is efficient. That is a tax that raises money without huge administrative costs. It is also a tax that is easy to administer, so that the compliance costs on the part of the tax collector are not very high. So that I would call that a very good tax system. Thank you.
And that's very interesting that you say equitable, fair, and the word I would like to add there is progressive. But let me come back to you. Let me bring in Ibrahim Bosa. We had a conversation some time back when we had the Commissioner General, but let me also get to what has been happening this week. A lot, even in Twitter feed that you've had today, a space that you've been answering questions. Where does the problem of valuation come from? Why are there so many questions about valuation, assumptive tax? Where is the problem, especially with the Uganda Revenue Authority?
Thank you very much, Timothy. and it's a pleasure to be here, and to our viewers. Valuation usually comes in when we are talking about international taxes. When you're importing a product into the country, it will be taxed, and its tax will be determined by the value attached to it. The value usually is calculated based on the cost, insurance, and freight, and depending where you have bought the commodity. So you'll find that 2-3 products, even when they are similar or the same, if bought from different jurisdictions, may actually have different valuations because of the effect of cost, insurance, and freight. And that is where the biggest distinction comes in terms of taxation, where people usually feel that one, maybe valuations are uncertain because valuations change based on what is happening around the world in the marketplace. So that has been the first area of contention, and what we are doing at the Uganda Revenue Authority is trying to be able to create transparency in aspects of valuation. Two, our tax regime, in addition to import duty, depending on what you're importing, anything that pays import duty will pay also import VAT. And what I think is difficult for our taxpayers to appreciate today, that the fact that an item has been imported into the country, that alone, bringing it into the value chain of our business cycle, is value addition. So charging VAT, import VAT on products that are coming into the country has also been a very difficult subject to teach to our taxpayers. And we also have another tax, usually, which is withholding tax, depending on the product that you are bringing in. These are things that people find challenging because somebody is asking, why are you withholding tax from me? And our regime is such that people who are not accustomed to being compliant in tax will always be able to, there will be a withholding tax on them, but this is a credit that is usually payable once somebody files their income final returns at the end of the year. So you realize that there's a bit of tax education that is required for people to understand these different types of taxes. If you look at, say, for example, comparing ourselves to a country like Kenya, here we have about 3 taxes for somebody who is importing into the country. Kenya has 2 taxes. So you'll find that the regimes may differ, and when people make that comparisons, it becomes a bit of a concern. If you're buying a car from abroad and importing it to Uganda, there would even be an extra tax, which is an environmental levy. Okay? Again, these are things that people think, one, I'm anti-being taxed too much. Okay? That's what sometimes people confuse to be double taxation. And I think the nail in the coffin is that when this person takes the goods and maybe takes them to their shop, and somebody within the domestic taxes comes and said, oh, have you paid your income tax? Somebody says, wait a minute, I paid import duties, I paid import VAT, why am I now paying income tax? So there is a gap in appreciating some aspects of our tax system, and that Uganda Revenue Authority, that is something we are making very deliberate to make sure that tax is understandable, tax is simple, and probably people know their rights and obligations. We have a number of measures we are putting in place, have put in place, and will be putting in place just to make sure that is done, as I will be elaborating here. But at the end of the day, we are making progress, especially now that we are dealing with sector by sector. We have approached sectors through their associations. So things of tax education, sensitization, and awareness is top of agenda, just to make sure that our taxpayers know what the obligations are and are able to conform.
And staying with you, Mr. Bosa, you talk about a tax, you talk about withholding tax, income tax, import duty, but let's talk about something that has been taking rounds on social media. Just a jersey that caused a lot of problems and havoc just at the airport. It's not the first one I have heard of. I've also had someone who gets a personal phone, brings in an iPhone, slapped with a tax at the airport. What is this confusion of valuation when it comes to things like that?
I think in the past, as you may be aware, the Uganda Revenue Authority has a history And we have had and suffered probably a lot of tax leakages in the past. So for specifically people who travel and probably are coming through the airport, people have been accustomed to being able to come, you bring gifts, you bring your personal effects, regardless the value and amount, and they will go probably untaxed. Or probably you're giving something to a custom agent who lacks integrity, and you're able to do that. A lot of transformation has happened at the Uganda Revenue Authority, especially in the last 3 years, that today things like integrity, our fight for corruption is on top of our agenda. But this has also tightened the noose a bit. So there's been a turnaround, especially, for example, at the Entebbe airport, and we are basically administering tax to the letter of the law, and that is actually making people uncomfortable. So basically, the issue is, if you are coming into the country and you have personal effects, okay, those personal effects are allowable to you to a value of $500 US. Anything above that will definitely pay duty. Now that is something that probably we realize that many people were not aware about, even when they were frequent travelers. That even when you buy a gift for your mother, for your sister, for your children, those gifts are legally, according to the East African Customs Management Act, those gifts are not for your consumption. Anything that you bring along and is not for your consumption, that is going to be given to somebody else, will be dutiable. So basically that is the law. And we realize that as soon as we have started to implement these provisions, there has been an outcry. So it is true, when you bring in an item, it will be dutiable. But also what people do not know is that when you bring in an item through a parcel, through the post office, through DHL, the limit actually goes down to $50 US. So there's an allowance for people carrying personal effects coming through the airport because you are accompanied by your luggage. But if that is coming through a parcel, the post office, the DHL, the allowable limit is even much lesser. There is even a provision people are probably not aware of, but we're trying to sensitize people, is that even the allowance is applicable if you have spent more than 24 hours out of the country. Meaning that if you left the entire airport today at 8 and came back by 6 in the evening, that's not 24 hours. Anything you bring will be dutiable. So you realize that it is appreciating the provisions of the law, and people also to appreciate that, for example, in terms of customs laws, international laws, the law that governs international tax is synonymous for the whole East African region. Duty has 4 bands. We have 0 rated duty, 10% duty, 25% duty, and 35% duty. And that is synonymous for the East African region. So we realize that our taxpayers, one, usually there is an information gap, but also probably because of the low tax morale and maybe fatigue, there are people who have politicized taxation. So people feel that taxes have to be a quid pro quo. If I've paid taxes today, why do I still see a pothole outside my home? So that is understandable because people, that is the feeling in terms of taxation. But people forget that even the history of taxes are not quid pro quo. Taxes is a transfer of a mandatory fee to the state to be able to deliver services to the larger part of the population. It is not that because I have paid 50,000, I'm supposed to get services equivalent for 50,000. That is why we have 3.5 taxpayer or teens on the register. And whatever taxes we collect actually are feeding, in terms of government delivery, to a population of over 45 million. So you realize that we have that econometrics to work around with to make sure that, one, can we collect enough taxes? Can we collect them transparently? Can we collect them efficiently? And these are things that we deal with. So yes, there have been some hullaballoos, if I may say, around appreciating the tax laws, the tax systems, and the procedures. And we are very aware that it is our duty as the tax administrator to educate our masses, to be able to make sure that information is available. And these, we have gone a long mile, including digitization, including coming up with mobile offices, including basically working with the grassroots in terms of coming up with tax catalysts, doing tax hubs, doing tax clinics, all in the vein of creating awareness, creating sensitization, and so that our taxpayers are aware of their rights and obligations.
I'll come back to that, and also I hope we can be able to tackle the impact of tax when you talk about things like that, because at the end of the day, it looks like it comes both ways. Andrew, let me come to you. You and I earlier on were having a discussion, and an ordinary Ugandan is out there watching. Bosa has given us numbers there, but let's simplify it. What does our tax base look like in this country, and what's the picture, especially before we come to the enhancements and all those changes? Give us a picture of what our tax base and our taxation as a regime looks like.
Okay, thank you so very much, Timothy. And to our dear viewers, a very good evening. It's a pleasure being here. Like you said, my maiden visit to this place. And it's very good always for me to discuss taxation, something that I'm very passionate about. Tax by nature is technical. And when you make it further technical, it becomes very hard for an ordinary person that you want to collect tax from to understand. So to give a perspective of this tax base and the whole thing, before it becomes a tax base, it is a population. Population is the number of people in Uganda, currently estimated by the World Bank at 48 million. So if you have 48 million Ugandans, you have to classify them. There are those who are going to give you the taxes, there are those who cannot give you the tax. Still, the numbers will show you that about 23 million Ugandans are dependent. It is a dependent population, 0 to 14 years, 65 years and above. So such a population is not as productive, and it could be outside your expected tax net. So you have then about 25 million Ugandans who are active between 15 years and perhaps 64 years. But still within that population, 15 up to 25 in Uganda is school going, or it's the majority youth. The numbers from WUBOS would show you that about 41% of Ugandan population are the youth. So from that number of 25 million, if I reduce the youth population being about 41%, I remain with 15 million active and in quotes productive Ugandans. Now, that is the context of our would-be tax base. So if we have a potential 15 million tax base, that is the 15 million population that we would expect to collect tax from. Now, it goes back, like my colleague Mr. Bosa said, we have a 3.5 people, or 3.5 million people on the tax register, vis-a-vis the potential 15 million. So there's that gap. Question, where is the 12? So to the ordinary person, we have people that can potentially give us some money as government, but they are not yet there. We have a lot to do. And to an ordinary person, these are the people who are earning something. Any form of income. In Uganda, we have 3 incomes categorized. You're either earning a business income, employment income, or property income. And if that income is not exempted or below a particular threshold set or standard set, then you fall within the tax basket or the tax net. So that is the number that should be contributing. And with this discussion, we can see the gap already. 3.5, we anticipate to get to 5 million, but we have a potential 15 that we can still hit. So that is, to an ordinary person, we have a gap. Not everyone is contributing to the national cake. And that is where we need to strategize. That is what we need to find solutions for as experts in this area and aid or help government. My senior brother, Mr. Kagwa, is here, is in charge of policy. So we need to have those solutions that then he can work with and see the development, the betterment of this country. Thank you.
And you speak about potential 15 and 3.5 that Boss has spoken about. And you're asking about the 12. But let me bring in Dr. John Bosco. Doctor, what's your reading of our tax regime? When we look at the regime, when we look at the base, when we look at the taxation, just this financial year, they said no new taxes except the digital tax that came in. What is your reading of our tax regime and the base? The 3.5 is talking about, but also the different taxes we have in this country. What do you make of it?
Thank you, Timothy. And viewers, I think to understand the tax system, the tax base, we need to understand the structure of the Ugandan economy, because it is from the activities and the income and anything that they generate that leads to taxation. So what I see from the economy is that a significant proportion of our GDP, 42%, actually come from services. The next 26% come from industry, and the other 24% come from agriculture. But when you look at the degree of informality that exists in these sectors, then you will know that it's difficult to come out with a good tax revenue. Because if you consider agriculture, 96% of the activities in agriculture falls under the informal sector. In industry, 52% of the GDP generated from industry comes from the informal sector. And when you come to services, which is the leading contributor to GDP, it has informality contribution of 42%. And then when you look at agriculture, we know that 39% of households engaged in agriculture are only in the subsistence production. And that 39% is actually contributing up to 3.5 million households. And if you take an average of, say, 4 persons per household, you end up with about 7 million Ugandans who cannot even be considered in terms of contribution to the tax. So when you look at the tax structure and how they are being brought in, there's a significant contribution that comes from goods and services as the leading contributor, that are in terms of VAT, in terms of excise duty, and then the next contributor is in terms of personal income taxes. But what I also see is that income taxes are not very progressive. There was a reform in 2012-2013 to change the tax bands and introduce a higher band of 40% for those who earn more than 10 million shillings. But when you look at the marginal tax rate and the average tax rate, it is only progressive for those at the lower income level and those at the higher income levels. When it comes to income levels of about 3 to 5 to 10 million shillings, it is almost proportionate. And that creates a problem because you can't generate enough revenue if you are using proportionate tax on a greater proportion of the population. So that is my take on how the economy relates to how we collect our taxes at the moment.
And Doctor, let's look at the lower end of it, the spectrum there. You have spoken about households, and it almost brought a light bulb. 3.5, 7 million, almost those fall in the 12 million that Andrew was talking about. And we seem like the taxation is deepening on the ones that are within the lean bracket. What do you read of that, especially giving us the example of 2012, 2013, and also looking at the enhancements of 2022, 2023 there? What do you see there, and what burden is within the tax bearers?
Yes, thank you. That shows that it's the same group of people are the one paying most of the taxes. Because if there's a person who earns between maybe 2 and 5 million shillings, they'll pay higher tax. But these are the same people who can afford most of those other commodities. So they are going to pay taxes in terms of whatever they pay in the markets. So there's a likelihood that there is going to be a tax fatigue on some small proportion of the population. So if you think of how to expand the tax base, it should be in such a way that the expansion should include more people in the tax bracket without necessarily burdening a small proportion of the population. And as you said, only 3.5 million agents or entities are in the tax register. And that doesn't mean they are only people. They are also companies that are registered with their TINs. So the taxation reforms that we will need to see should be in such a way that it should bring down tax rates. It should make filing taxes easier, because there are many businesses struggling. They have to pay people in order to file taxes, and that is an additional cost to a small business.
Okay.
Thank you.
Professor, let me bring you in. He spoke about fatigue, but also the person watching us there, especially striking the balance between the tax and the impact of the tax. Let's look at it. What is failing, or what is the missing link between the taxation and the expectation of an ordinary Ugandan, a good road, a good public school? Where is the missing link there?
Thank you, Timothy, and good evening, our viewers. Indeed, as he said, we should not politicize the tax, but you cannot divorce people from the expectation of the tax. So when people pay, it is just natural that they expect that their tax is going to be used to some good purpose. The public, first of all, as he said, of course, you have a very small population paying the tax. His statistics actually were very impressive, putting it at 41% being dependent. Actually, some of the U-Boat statistics put the dependent population at 67%, when they argue that 67% is 15 years and below, and if you add on also the older ones. So as others have said, you have a small band that is paying. And so if you have a very big dependent population and a very small population paying the tax, it's not very feasible that the tax will do everything that everyone wants to be seen to be done. The first presenter started with, among the very many things he talked about, it was the keyword of efficiency. When you asked about what makes a good tax, and one of the things he said, apart from it being understandable to everybody, was that it must be efficient in terms of collection. It should not be very costly to the collector. Now, the challenge with that has been for those who collect the tax to keep to those who are in the formal sector, to keep to those who have been registered, to keep to those who can be identified. But as others have said, there may be a need to expand this kind of taxation, the people who are paying tax. I will give you an example. A primary school teacher who earns 250,000 will pay tax because there's a system at which you'll see that this person's salary is like that. But there are many people in the informal sector who make that 250,000 either on a daily or on a weekly. But they cannot be taxed because they cannot be identified. And because those who collect the tax have not worked their way around this economy. Forget, okay, maybe the rural areas, it's obvious there's nothing much to tax. But there's a lot of businesses that occur in the urban areas which actually are not being taxed. They are small, yes, but if a small-time primary school teacher is paying, probably these ones could also be brought on board. But now, if we are going to say that that is costly for the tax collector, what is the other way you can bring people on board? I know someone talked about the politicization of taxes. I think that is a problem if it is done negatively. For starters, historically, taxation is the cost you pay for living in civilized society. It's part of the social contract. What are your obligations as a citizen, and what is the obligation of the state to you? So those who have operated taxes for centuries actually get the breaking point when they politicize the tax for a good cause, make it part of the nation building project. Sensitize it to people so that other than the technicalities of tax that I don't know, people know that this is my commitment to my country, okay? And if this is my country and this is what it wants to achieve, then it is my duty to pay the tax. And in some countries we've lived in, people will actually pay tax for a small cottage industry that the state hasn't seen, okay? Like someone will be doing some smelting, some jewelry in the house, but knows that this tax goes to my NHS. That's like if you're living in the UK. It will go to the elderly people's home. So even if that person is working within their cellar and could actually get away without paying the tax, will be obliged to pay the tax because it's part of their belonging to that society. And it is part of course, it's also clear to what the tax will do. And we've lived in some society where someone says, if I don't pay tax, some poor person will be, the homeless person will not eat. They try to make a lot of connections. Why? Because there's been sensitization about the tax beyond the technical, okay? First of all, even the technical in this country is wanting. It is only when they capture you at the airport that you begin screaming because you didn't know about that. So there's a lot of tax information to those who are paying tax. But there's also need to take this technical information to those who are not already paying, because any one of us is a candidate for tax paying tomorrow, for taxation. But beyond that, I'm saying, even beyond the technical, there's a need to carry the population on board, so that even where the government doesn't have the means to enter our homes and to enter our cellars, people take it upon themselves to say, okay, if I've done this, this is part of my social contract, let me give this to the state, let me declare. But also hoping that when they declare, the tax collector will now not begin imagining that if you can pay this year, it means you have been dodging for the previous years, and then say, okay, how long has the business been around? And you're slapped with arrears. So there's a lot of mistrust, there's a lot of suspicion, there's a lot of perceptions of wasteful expenditure and things like that. So if these can be sorted, and then it's made part of your belonging to this, it's made part of your citizenship obligation, then people would actually pay the tax. Because first of all, maybe we don't have the resources to collect from wherever we must collect. We have to be efficient. But how do we bring it up so that people feel that there's need? So to go back to your question, there's the challenge of a very big dependent population. So there's less you can do with that. That's why, I mean, we are very, very donor dependent, because our population is so big, but more than 60% of those are not paying tax. Even the adults who would have paid tax are not paying tax because they're not in gainful employment. So that's one of our biggest challenges. Yet everybody believes that they must be getting a service. So that becomes challenge number one. But also there's the challenge of information. But also beyond that, there's the challenge of connecting this obligation of paying tax with the belonging of a space called Uganda. And I think all these need to move simultaneously.
And I want to come to Mr. Kagwa. One of the things that really happened when this financial year was beginning, as policymakers there, you said no new taxes, but there was the digital tax slapped there, and also enhancements. One of the things that really caught my ear or my eye there was capital gains for withholding tax. Let's leave that one. Where we leave asset classes and move to any economic value, meaning whatever I have that makes economic sense, you tax it. And also when we look at a business that has been making losses for 5 years, in the 6th year it's 50%. What informed these enhancements, and what impact do you see from these enhancements?
Thank you, Timothy. One, I wanted to talk a bit about the Jersey.
Oh, please.
Yes. Very interesting. The tax, when you bring in any item, the tax is already determined. There is a 35% import duty. There is an 18% VAT. There is an infrastructure levy, a withholding of 6%. All these are payable on an import into this country. Now, I don't know why there was a lot of hullabaloo, because the people who have been importing T-shirts and shirts and every other thing have faced the same regime, though they have been importing in bulk. Maybe that's why there hasn't been a lot of outcry. But when you import, and there's so many, sometimes people do import and they face taxation and they say, how can I pay this? But People who have been in this business before have faced the same taxation and they have paid. Two, I want to put the tax also in context. Some people say, well, our people are poor, they cannot pay tax. Of course, we need to empower our people. And one of the things we have done as government is, for example, the parish development model, where we get the 39% of the households who have been in subsistence, go into economic activities that will generate income. And when they generate income, they will be able to pay taxes. We have the Myoga program for those talent groups where people have not been having access to finances. That is part of government to try and ensure that there are more people who are engaged into business activities and they do earn some money. Then we also have Small Business Recovery Fund of 200 billion, and this is to help the businesses that suffered greatly during COVID to be able to recover. And we have a number of initiatives in government that are assisting the private sector to be able to grow and contribute to the treasury. We have over 1.7 trillion, I think, shillings in the budget, just geared towards private sector. And what do we expect in return? We expect taxes, we expect jobs, we expect value addition, and all this to try and grow our economy. Now I come to specifically on tax.
But Mr. Kagwe, let me ask.
Yes.
What informed you putting that money in those areas? Was there a feasibility study done?
There was.
That informed that the money needs to go there?
Yes.
That these are the needs of Ugandans?
Yes. There was. So coming back to this issue of taxes and the population, I look at it in another angle as I come to the population. When you look at the value of goods and services produced in this country in a year, what is the tax that is collected from those goods and services? Last year it was 13.6%. In countries which are within the region, the average is 16%. Africa is almost 18%. And we can talk about the demographics, we can talk about the informality. Some of these countries mirror what is happening in Uganda, but they collect more tax. So these figures are okay, but you cannot be able to collect only a paltry 13.6%. This year, where in which we are trying to collect 14.5%. It's still below. So a lot of taxes is not about the number of the individuals of the population who are there. The biggest taxpayers contribute a lot, and these are agents. For me, I would call them agents. They call themselves the biggest taxpayers, but they are agents. Because when I make a call to you and say, Timothy, I've called you, I've become a taxpayer because there is tax on that call. Though I'm not registered, there is a collector who picks that money. When I go to a supermarket and I buy a kilo of sugar, I'm not registered, but there is tax on that kilo of sugar. There is excise duty, there is VAT, which I've paid, but I'm not recognized as a taxpayer. So it's important that in this country we increase the level of economic activity, because with this economic activity, people will have disposable income, whether they're registered or not, then they will pay. I don't mean to say that we shouldn't have more people, but also you can have more people on the register when they are not value taxpayers. Why should I have more people on the register? For example, when you look at some of the small and medium enterprises, if the person earns between 10 million and 30 million, the tax on that person is about 60,000. So even if you get 100,000 people giving you 60,000, they won't give you much of taxes. So you need to see how to increase your economic activity and be able to have a larger base that gives you a lot of money. Now, on specifically on those issues like why did we have a cap on losses? In income tax, we usually have generous deductions. And then you find that after when you have these generous deductions, they are exploited by taxpayers. And every time, instead of paying the tax, they will go and do something which will give them deductions so that their tax base is always low, sometimes always in the negative. You can imagine we had situations where some people had gross income of over 10 billion shillings, but they were registering losses and continuously, year in, year out. So a lot of jurisdictions, when that happens, they say you are still in business and you're not getting out of business, though you are making losses. So after some time, maybe after 5 years, why don't you start making a contribution? And that's what we have done. It's recognized internationally that when a business is still in operation, you can have a tax on it as long as it has turnover. So that happens. In some countries, even there is something called alternative minimum tax for some of these companies. So it's a good measure to generate some revenues. At the same time, you allow the companies to continue operating.
But Mr. Kagwa, the companies you're talking about, you're coming for their growth. This same company has a loan, it's servicing, it's part of its expense, but you're still taxing its gross at 50%. The biggest question is, why have a blanket enhancement and not just see how you handle it per individual there?
In taxation, you cannot have a case by case, because you will not be fair. You cannot administer a tax system based on, let me look at this individual and see what happens. Most of the companies, like when you say that someone has a loan, you cannot have a loan and you are paying interest which is more than your gross income or equal to your gross income. There should be a problem there. That is not an interest that you should be taking, because banks, for example, companies are borrowing at between 18 to 20%. So that is what you should be taking off. And when you are looking at your books, when you go to the bank, you would show them that with even this loan of with an interest of 18 to 20%, I will be able to break even. So there is nobody who says, I'll break even if I don't pay tax. No, they say they will break even. So those are the considerations that you take in.
All those are assumptions. It's not the ideal in the economy, because the assumption is I'll break even in 2 years and I've taken this loan. But you're coming to tax the same loan and asking me to pay it to you as a tax.
Timothy, what we have seen is not the loan. It's about the other deductions people are taking. In taxation, there is a principle called gold plating, whereby people, instead of, when they reach the taxable situation, instead of paying the tax, they would rather have more, even if they don't need them. They would rather have more equipment, they would bring in more technology, which they may not even need, but because they know that I can deduct this, it becomes a deductible expense. They don't really care so much, they do it.
Okay.
So that's where we come in and say, no, after 5 years and you are still continuing in business, why don't you make a contribution?
Okay, let me bring in Mr. Bossa. Ibrahim, one of the biggest challenges, and this will be a twofold question for you. One, how does the Uganda Revenue Authority, as one that administrates this taxing, how do you insulate yourself from the politics? Two, what drives you? Is it the revenue? Because all we hear about is Uganda Revenue Authority has a target of 25 trillion. Next year, 29 trillion. Should it be driven by revenue or priorities? What should be driving our taxation of the population?
Thank you very much, Timothy. Drivers of the Uganda Revenue Authority, there are one or two, basically. We have a dream that we can be able to collect enough resources to finance our expenditure as a country for service delivery, and we believe we can do this efficiently and transparently. We believe that we can collect enough money to be able to save our country from the bondage of borrowing. That is our driver as Uganda Revenue Authority. And we have seen it even on the continent. Our neighbors, that is the Kenya Revenue Authority, they have been able to mobilize and collect revenues that finance 95% of their budget. Their tax to GDP is 16%. We believe we can do so. So because that is our driver, everything that we do is basically aiming to that. So moving backwards, we realize that one, we have a very large informal sector. Currently, I think our informal sector is contributing about 53% to GDP, but not contributing substantially in terms of taxation. So we have come up with programs, and this is with the help of the government, where we are partnering with other government agencies to be able to build business formalization. There are people who are in business, people who generate an income but are not visible to us. They are not reachable. We do not know who they are. They cannot easily be identified. So we are working with under the tax register expansion program, initiated by the government. We are working with the URSB, Uganda Registration Services Bureau. We are working with the KCCA. We are working with the Ministry of the Local Government and URA in business formalization. In that, if somebody is able to register for business, URA is there in that partnership to make sure that they are registered for taxes. If somebody is acquiring a license, a trading license, URA is also there to be able to make sure that they can meet their obligation in terms of taxation. If somebody is going to pay property tax, URA is there to benefit and make sure that that person also complies with that obligation. So there is a bit of that tripartite working to make sure that we bring formally invisible people to us in terms of taxation so that they can now meet their obligation. We know that we have a very big chunk of very small businesses that we call the SMEs that actually fuel this economy. And these are people basically who are earning between 10 million in terms of turnover a year to 150 million turnover a year. Those ones, we classify them as small businesses. We have come up with a tax regime that is favorable for them. If somebody is earning a turnover per year below 10 million shillings, they don't pay tax as a business. If you're earning between 10 million and 30 million, you pay what we call a presumptive tax, and that is only 80,000 shillings a year. And that is simple. We are saving people from the issues of filing and you having an accountant. That is standard as your presumptive tax for a year. If you're earning between 30 million and 50 million turnover a year, you only pay 200,000 a year, final tax. The maximum you'll pay if you have a turnover of 150 million is 900,000. So the presumptive regime has come to help small businesses because we know they are poor at record keeping and issues of the like, so we are making it simple for them. Simple also means making sure that people can pay this tax very conveniently. We have people like the boda-bodas, like the taxi drivers, who pay an advance income tax. A boda-boda pays tax of 20,000 advance income tax a year, final tax. But I'll tell you that with 1 million borders in this country, probably none is actually paying this 20,000. That is about 20 billion that is uncollected. Why? Because the border does not see himself riding their border, leaving it on the side of the road to go to generate a PRN and then go to the bank queue to pay 20,000 with bank fees. So what we have done is to digitize the process to make sure that even with use of your phone and the USSD code with *285#, you can be able to pay your rental tax, your advanced income tax, your presumptive tax, your income tax in the convenience of your home, in the convenience of where you are, whether you're in a restaurant or at a border stage.
Also staying with you, I still feel, even as you say it, you're driven by revenue, not by priorities. One of the taglines that I think you had some time back was, let's collect taxes together and build Uganda. Wouldn't that be a driver in the right direction, positive impact of what the taxes would do, rather than what you're breaking down, 200,000, 80,000. Really, I'm feeling very repelled to pay the tax because the impact is not there, but you're asking me to pay money.
Actually, let me confirm to you that it is true that we receive a target, a revenue target, every financial year by our supervisors, the ministry. Our target this year is 29 point, I think, about 6 trillion to be collected. We have geared ourselves as the Uganda Revenue Authority that we shall actually surpass 30 trillion in terms of collection. So it's true we have a target, and this target is cascaded through everybody. Everybody who basically is on a revenue center will have a target. But even when we are collecting revenue, the superordinate goal is that we need to be able to do this so that it can be able to turn out into service delivery. Okay? So whether you call it a driver or not, it is something that we have to achieve, but we have to achieve it within means, cost effectively, efficiently, and people need to understand what their contribution is. Timothy, I would want to tell you that one of the best performing taxes in the East African region is the value-added tax, because it is indirect, and actually everybody, as long as you are consuming, you would be able to pay this tax. In Rwanda, value-added tax contributes to their collection at about 35%. What is the case for Uganda? Our value-added tax is only contributing about 15% to our collection. Do you know why, Timothy? It's because many of the registered VAT businesses, they do collect this tax and do not remit it, which is a leakage. So we believe that with being more effective, more efficient, we are able to close such revenue leakages. That's why you see technologies have come in, like the electronic receipting and invoicing, which basically gives real-time statistics of transactions, especially for value-added tax. So we are saying that we can be more efficient to be able to, yes, to meet the target, but 2, to collect enough revenue that can finance service delivery. I'll tell you that we have sectors that are still virgin in this country, Timothy. Agriculture, which employs probably over 70%, does not make a contribution to taxation. We have...
Let me come back to you on that one, especially those areas that are informal. But let me bring in Andrew. Andrew, a person down in Yumbe, Kaberamaido, has a shop, but the tax is being pushed down to them. Whether they're buying water, all these things, and they still push it down to the final consumer. When you look at this, is our tax regime fair? Is it equitable? Because these are some of the things that the Ministry of Finance is talking about, that it should be fair, it should be equitable, it should be progressive. When you look at it, does it fit that criteria, and what is failing us to get there?
Okay, thank you, Timothy. That's an interesting question that requires perhaps understanding what fairness or what a fair tax system is, for starters.
In a layman's language.
In a layman's person. Fair would be if I earn 10 million and Ibrahim earns 10 million and my rate or my contribution is 10%, we should all pay 10% because we belong to the same category or the same group. If I earn 10 million and my neighbor earns 15 million, there should be a difference, or the one of 15 should be paying more than me who is paying 10. And that is the spirit of fairness. So the understanding of fairness, and I will link it to the old timers, Adam Smith in 1776, he says that everyone ought to contribute to the development of the country, but only in as much as the proportions of their contributions should be equivalent to their abilities. So fair is your ability. If you make 10, contribute this. Now, let's come to the system.
Let me add to it.
Yes.
You have taxes you're paying for value addition to your shop, but you also have licenses you're paying for by the local government. Is that fair? Is it really equitable? Yet Timothy, who has rentals somewhere, is paying a particular percentage and really is not feeling the pinch of some of those things.
And that's where I'm going to come. That you see, understanding taxation, it's not a blanket thing. We have direct taxes and we have indirect taxes. Indirect taxes, for example, VAT, that you do not visibly see, but it is simply passed over to you. And then we have the direct taxes which are direct on the incomes that you've earned. So a trader in Yumbe, a trader in Kaveramaido, when they are purchasing the items they're going to sell, they will, if they purchase from a VAT registered person, for example, that person by law is required to charge them VAT. And it will be a cost of that purchase. But that cost, they can claim it if they are VAT registered. Now, a lay person down here, most probably their turnover does not reach the threshold of registration. So it becomes a cost or a burden at that level. Now, on top of that 18, which has been a cost at that level, that let trader down. Now, URA has to come either through the van or through the people passing around, and they are going to also ask some tax on profit. Like Mr. Bosa says, these small traders, you have to simplify the tax system for them. Simplification is through the presumptive tax regime. You have bans and all that. But I want us to touch base with the ground. I will tell you some of these things happen in the act, but they don't happen on the ground. You could say someone who earns, say 150 million is 900,000. But I will tell you, when a URA officer is moving door by door, he will give you people of 1 million, of 2 million. I've had scenarios where someone goes to a very small hardware or a very small shop, and they have a predetermined figure in a letter. And the number is 5 million, the number is 3 million. Now, a local person who has put 20 to 10 million, when you give them 1 million, and perhaps you're saying, if you are within this area, or if you're within Kampala, or if you're within a municipality, I do not expect a declaration of 2, simply because you've simplified. Then there's a problem there, because then you become unfair to me, who is actually running a very, very small business. And on top of that, true, we have taxes administered through the central government, and those are through the different acts. Then the local government, because of this decentralization, is also given mandate, because government cannot facilitate them fully. So they are given the powers through legislature to also collect something. There could be not taxes per se, fees, rates like property tax. But a local person, if I have to buy items and I pay 18% VAT, then when I'm selling, URA wants to pick a 30% income tax. Then the local government will come and they want a property tax. Let's say 8% for Wakiso or whichever percentage for Kampala. And on top of that, I have staff that I have to pay 10% for if I'm NSSF. The burden is too huge. And
Andrew, I'm going to ask that we put a stick in it. I want to come back to you and Doctor and then Professor here. But let me read this message that really is in line with what you're saying. Clinics pay licensing fees to the licensing council, e.g., Uganda Medical and Dental, and then we also pay Allied Health Professional Council. We also pay Uganda Nursing and Midwife Council. The clinic is operating and needs a trading license from local government where we are located. URA is now coming to levy taxes on the clinic. The property has to pay rent and staff. It has to pay local government independent from the central government, or the same government is double taxing the same institution. How do they expect the proprietor to go into a money economy when the same government is advocating for enhancing household income, continues to overtax the same person? Where are we heading, our beloved Uganda? Isn't this an oxymoron? Thank you very much. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be responding to some of these.
Water, please. Can I pay with Momo?
No.
Ha. Hey, can I pay with Momo? Ha.
Here's our merchant
Oh, very good.
7 maker?
20. Can I pay with Momo?
Unfortunately, no.
Ha. Baby, let's go.
When paying with MTN Momo comes with more benefits for everyone, it just doesn't make sense not to have it.
Hello, I've come for rent.
Can I pay with Momo? Ha.
Yes, you can.
Pay or shop with MTN Momo and get cashback every week. It's free of charge. Use the Momo app or dial *165*3#.
Juko.
Yo.
What you go? Check the shopping, man. What's your secret?
Uganda, haven't you heard of the parish development model PDM?
Yes, I did, but I thought it was just a talk.
No, Sebatia. It is real. I and a few friends together formed a circle, accessed money from the PDM, invested in a portrait project, and now things are moving.
Juko. I thought I was one of your friends.
You are.
But you left me behind.
I didn't leave you in poverty. What you do, just visit your LC2 chairperson and your parish chief and start the process of economic transformation. Just like that. The parish development model is an initiative from the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Local Government designed to transform all lives of Ugandans for the better. PDM, my parish, my development, my life.
Uncle, you should see London.
Oh, my boy. This has been 5 years. You should see Uganda.
Yes. Uncle Marcus, this is my former school.
See, soon there will be more than 1 million children learning like this for free.
This is impressive. Do you even have connection out here?
Well, we have 100% 4G countrywide.
Okay.
We even have 5G too.
That's approximately 700 billion Uganda shillings in tax, making Airtel one of the largest corporate income taxpayers over the last 5 years, helping build a better Uganda.
Today, your son saw our new Uganda.
Thank you, Uganda, for imagining it with us and making us the fastest growing telecom in the country over the past 5 years.
Malaria is still the #1 cause of death in Uganda. To help you protect your family from malaria, the government of Uganda is continuing its mosquito nets distribution campaign to give mosquito nets to every household in the country. Register and receive your mosquito nets from the community health worker. Distribution of nets in the following districts and cities will take place from the 8th to the 13th of September 2023. Buku, Bulambuli, Vuyende, Ibanda, Iganga, Jinja City, Jinja, Kamuli, Kamwenge, Kapchora, Kazo, Chegegwa, Luka, Mbara City, Mbara, Namayingo, Ntungamo, and Rwampara. Every district will have received their mosquito nets by November. Together, we can chase malaria out of Uganda. Sleep under a mosquito net every night. This message is brought to you by the Ministry of Health with support from the Global Fund.
Are you tired of high fees and slow transfer time when sending money? Airtel Money is here to revolutionize the way you move your money. We have revised our rates back to ground. Sending money from Airtel to other networks in Uganda, East Africa, and to the rest of the world has never been more affordable. Dial *185# and start sending money. Switch to Airtel Money today and experience unbeatable rates and top-notch services for all your local and international money transfer needs. Airtel Money. Instant, secure, borderless.
Uganda's oil and gas activities are undertaken in line with the updated environment legislation and benchmarked on international best practice standards in order to continuously ensure coexistence between the oil activities and Uganda's rich biodiversity. the award of the Environment and Social Impact Assessment certificates for the Kingfisher, Tilenga, and East African crude oil pipeline projects, various environmental and social management plans have also been developed to ensure sustainable development of the projects. The Petroleum Authority of Uganda is working with other regulatory bodies to monitor all oil and gas activities to enhance compliance and environment protection during oil activities. The Petroleum Authority of Uganda, creating lasting value in Uganda's oil journey.
Welcome back from that quick commercial break here on Behind the Headlines. My name is Ntyangweso. In the studio, I'm joined by Professor Sarah, Dr. John Bosco, I'm joined by Andrew Chambade, I'm joined by Ibrahim Bossa and Moses Kagwa here. Let me read some of the feedback that is coming through. As long as people do not see what the benefit for their taxes is, it seems like the politicians and the leaders are fattening themselves and taxation will be a problem. Okay? One more. Issues of tax evasion avoidance by private sector do exist. URA could improve on that. In some of the businesses, there is a tendency to underdeclare profits, an intention of evading or avoiding taxes. Some businesses have 3 sets of books of accounting, and one of them is for URA, the others are to keep for themselves. This is John from Chenga. He continues to say, why not be pragmatic or proactive in our tax collection like Tanzania? The hotels and lodges have the TRA serialized receipts that help track sales, monthly service tax for hotels. Can we rule out collusion between the taxpayer and the collectors, considering our corruption rates and indexes at customs points? Thank you very much for those messages. Andrew, you were finishing a thought before I come to Dr. John.
So to just bring it on board, like what you just read, the truth and the fact of the matter is sometimes what we have in our tax laws or in our policy documents, we have an NDP3 that is really guiding us. Sometimes they differ from what is actually happening on ground. So looking at such a business with a hefty or a number of those taxes, when you add them, by the way, they could even hit 85%. So you find someone's capital being actually used for payment of tax at the end of the day, if you make an amalgamation of all the taxes. So this really cripples, and to someone who has borrowed, who has sold land to start a business, wherever paid rent, started buying maybe the equipment or whatever goods they're going to trade, it becomes a disincentive. So if I have imported, I have cleared the taxes, and then you come back, that's where you see that people become really aggressive against these collections. And like Mr. Bossa was saying, that the first question of valuation, true, the law gives you the valuation and the procedures, for example. But what is on ground is different. And I'll be honest, come to the used motor vehicles. The policy thinking behind it, yes, these people could not tell you the truth. They could forge invoices. They can't do all these things. And then let me not follow the proper value evaluation method and then use a fallback or the other alternative method that is researched and I have information. This has been challenged in court, and the court has said, no, please follow the law the way it is. But it is different. Up to today, I think today, so URA has issued more indicative figures, which is still contrary to the law. So sometimes what we have within these laws and what actually happens on ground is different. I'll tell you, Timothy, I have been and I've seen, I practice every day. You see someone who has a small boutique and they come to you with an assessment of 17 million. A very small boutique in an area like Chengera. And they say, I received this on my email, it's 17 million. Now, this is a person, say, finished a first degree, was not able to get a job. Or senior 6, they have no job. Now, that 17 million, the option they have is either to pay it or to challenge it. Now, challenging that 17 million requires that you have proper books of accounts. Because the law is standard, like Mr. Kagwa said. Have accounts, demonstrate that you did not make 17 million. The tax law is made in a way that the commissioner's position or your position is always correct. So you have the burden to prove them otherwise. So you find that now such a person is either going to be harassed through the different enforcement methods. I have seen people die actually or get pressure because of these enforcement text messages, the calls, the follow-ups. Yes, one side is doing their work, but have we sat down to ascertain the accuracy of these assessments?
Okay.
Are we just throwing assessments? Are we throwing frivolous assessments? Or we have tried to understand such kind of a small trader in Yumbe and understood their business and ensure that we apply the tax law not with the mind of, say, meeting the target because we have pressure, but fairly to the kind of business. And that is where we should go, and this is where this discussion should go. People are bleeding, and I have to be honest. People are bleeding. Everyone is telling you taxes are too much. They do not understand even the basic taxes. But because they feel you have to collect, you get the message, it's too much. And that is where we have to do better. Okay. We have to be very clear.
Let me bring in Dr. John. This message really is one that I cannot leave without reading. Hello, Timothy. This is Joel from Bukasam. I love the show so much. I'm an MTN Momo agent. I earn about 1 to 1.5 million monthly. I pay withholding tax of 6%. I would love to know what this tax means, its benefit to the country, before when these companies can be able to be paid or never paid. Okay, I think he's asking about the benefit there. But Doctor, let me come to you. You being both a professor here of economics, but also being a professor at the Marshall University in West Virginia there. There are some corridors that talk about indirect tax, a lazy man's collection ability there. Help us understand why is it lazy for us there to be able to collect this tax, but also you have studied this a lot in different economies. What is the impact of our tax regime on an ordinary Ugandan?
Thank you, Timothy. Taxes are compulsory everywhere. So on average, over the lifetime of everyone, you have to pay taxes. And obviously, it will impact welfare because it reduces your disposable income. And at the end of the day, the government should be able to provide public goods and services. So even here in Uganda and other parts of the world, people feel the pain of paying taxes. The only difference is in terms of how much benefits they could receive from government. We know that we are still a developing country. Many things are not yet very right. But in developed countries like the USA, roads are well maintained, access to healthcare, access to education, especially in the Nordic countries. Once you pay your taxes, you know that there's a government that will provide when you are in need. Even if the tax rate is very high, they won't have resistance. But in the case of our country, people feel that they are paying taxes, but they're not seeing the benefits. And that is some issue that needs to be addressed through public administration, through efficient use of the resources. There's a principle of expediency in taxation. Are you imposing a tax which is practicable, and also will it be able to make sense to the taxpayers? Is it also neutral? Neutrality of taxes is in terms of, will it affect how people will allocate resources? If it is not neutral, somebody will think of, if this sector is being taxed, let me take my resources and do something else. Probably you'll see that many people are going into agriculture in Uganda because it is not taxed. And that is creating inefficiency in the allocation of resources. So worldwide taxes have effect on persons, reduces your disposable income, but if the government can give good public services, they won't feel it. But if the tax is not neutral, we may see inefficient allocation of resources. People start producing what is not taxed and avoiding even the best options of investment in fear of taxes.
And keeping with you, Doctor,
yes.
Indirect tax.
Yes.
Some theories have said it's a lazy man's tax. What are the alternatives? Because it seems the biggest bulk of our tax regime is in the indirect area.
One thing with indirect taxes, it makes the collection easy from the part of the tax collector. That's why they may think of it as being a lazy man's way of collecting taxes. But the alternatives of direct taxes can also be very difficult to implement. Imagine running after every single person to pay their taxes, like those days when they had poll tax. It would be very difficult to realize revenue. But if you have indirect taxes imposed on a commodity, a person who is far away will go and buy something and he will be paying. Although, like VAT, tend to be regressive, because at the end of the day, it is pushed on to everybody who buys that commodity. And it doesn't matter whether you are of a low income or of a high income. You imagine VAT of, say, 10,000 on something, it is pushed down to the last person. The person with high income will buy that commodity. The person with low income will also buy the same commodity and they will pay the same taxes. So at the end of the day, we may think that indirect taxes is a lazy man's approach, but it is easier. It is more efficient in terms of the tax collection system.
Professor, coming to you, and let's switch this up and we'll leave the part of how bad the taxes have been and the tax base and widening it. Let's look at value. Even as narrow as the tax base is, how can we get value for our taxes?
Thank you, Timothy. I think the assumption there is that we are not getting value for the taxes. But as I said, first of all, when you look at our budget, some of it comes from taxes, a lot of it comes from borrowing. And I think for me, this communicates that the country wants to provide a certain service to its people, but it does not have enough money. So my assumption from that, or what I make out of that, is actually there is value. It is just that our aspirations are so high as a country, and what we are collecting is not enough. That's why what we see does not look like it's making any value. Because those of us who are not economists will not speak in terms of technical things. An ordinary person engages with the state through the services the state provides. That is healthcare. If they go to the facility, will they find? And officially, by the way, on paper, government provides our healthcare services. The reality is that when people go there, they don't find the things that they're supposed to find, even basics like Panadol in some places. On paper, actually, the government is providing our education free from the lowest levels up to USE. And indeed, given our population demographic, that's a very expensive thing. But of course, we see that within that, there's not much value. By way of aspiration, the government wants to expand our road network. It wants to do agro-industrialization. So the government has very good things and very good intentions, but all these things cost money. So in terms of value, there would be value. I think the challenge is that the money is just too little that is collected vis-a-vis the aspirations. That's why they augment it by borrowing. But now, those of us who are not in those circles don't see that. As you see, as someone said before, you see your tax and you see a pothole, okay? You see your tax, you go to the local health center 3 or 4, and you don't find medicine. So that's how people interact. And that's why I talked about seeing these things in terms of the social contract between the state and the citizen. Part of the assumption of that is that the state will care for you from the cradle to the grave, okay? So you have your duty to pay all those things. But if someone's going to pay their tax and then they don't even find basic medicines or painkillers in a health facility, again, not because the tax didn't do its work, but because there's so many forms of leakages and inefficiencies in other sectors in addition to the tax collection sector, then people are seeing one state, and it is the state they paid. So that translates in the state is not helping. And what does that do? Then it drives people to build a bad culture of taxation. Because you see, tax is not only politics. Tax is also a culture. In other places where the culture of taxation, of paying taxes have been built for a long time, people actually will pay. I know it's difficult to pay tax. Many people, the common incentive would be to dodge it. But if they see something, then that culture is nurtured and they continue paying. At least they don't grumble that much. But where you don't see any value in terms of your real terms as a person, you only see the state or the police appears when there's been a crime committed on the village. So people have a problem with that. And then you go further than that to see, well, what you have paid for has not been implemented. But beyond that, the assumption of the tax collector is punitive. Always the assumption is that you have dodged. So they want to put you in order. The very thing you talked about of revenue only. I know you presented it as revenue. But sometimes people feel the tax collection regime is more punitive and is not out to actually nurture more business growth, which everyone has said there. I know those who sit in those places may have a different story, but sometimes those who are paying are saying, well, is there an incentive of not just collecting revenue, but also growing the businesses that are generating this revenue? And I know, I think it is Ibrahim who talked about there being targets. So the URA is working under tough targets. And of course, as he said, this is cascaded below. Sometimes then how that is passed on to the end user becomes problematic because sometimes it's actually assumptions. And I'll give an example. This year, many people in the civil service got this kind of phone calls, a message initially that, you know, you haven't filed your tax returns for a very long time, and please call this number. And people did actually call those numbers, and there were genuine URA numbers. And then the questions that were being taken through were, have you filed your tax returns? And then people's response was, but we are paid a government salary, we're just civil servants. So if the salary, I mean, when we are paid by government, the salary is taken off right away. I mean, the tax is taken off right away. So maybe our companies file for us, or the Ministry of Public Service files for us. So then the next question was, haven't you done any consultancy? Haven't you done all this? So it's like, oh, so these people made an assumption, and they actually people went and checked. And when they checked, they said, no, 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 you don't have, you don't owe anything. We don't have anything against you. So now those were the people in the civil service who know someone in URA who would say, or who called those numbers and said, check for me. If you didn't have that, then you end up to the small boutique someone was talking about here, that you don't know who to call. You've been slapped with 17 million and you better have to pay. So going back to what you're saying, there would be value, but the system is lined with a lot, first of all, of lack of awareness, a lot of distrust, and the distrust is not just with the tax that is being levied, but also with the one the person is interfacing with. And of course, then that goes hand in hand with probably, can we do something about it to lower it? And then that reinforces the thinking that maybe it was not genuine in the first place. So then people relate with the tax as a form of disgruntlement. And so then that builds a culture of dodging. So the moment people begin their businesses, the first incentive is in how do I avoid instead of how do I pay. So then we need to work on that culture.
Thank you very much. Let me come to Mr. Kagwa. One of the biggest questions, even when the numbers were given of the small or the narrow tax base there, how do we widen, how do we broaden this tax base to bring in people in the informal sector, people that are really making money? Because someone is selling a cow and really, they're not, how do we broaden this? How do we widen tax base?
Thank you, Timothy. First of all, I appreciate what Professor Salia said. I think it's very valid in terms of the amount of money we are collecting and the services that are being offered. I think we need to collect more money and then to account to the public what that money is being used for. It's very, very important. On how to increase the tax base, we have a domestic revenue mobilization strategy, which is from 2021 to 2023-24. Unfortunately, it was disturbed a bit by, the implementation was disturbed by the COVID, so we couldn't really enforce it. But it has a lot of good things. One is to ensure that the social contract between the citizen and government is implemented. We should account to the populace what we are going to do, why we are going to tax them. So now even the consultations we are having, we are going to have, they are going to be enhanced to ensure that whatever proposals we have, we sit with the tax-paying public and discuss and agree on the proposals going forward. We may not actually agree entirely, but at least we'll have very frank discussions with them on how we are going to go forward. So that is at that general level. We are also looking at the local government taxation and trying to assist local governments with collecting taxes. Most of the local governments, when you look at them, hardly collect enough money even to pay their councillors. Most of them actually collect like between 1% and 3% of their budget from their local sources. So we are working with them to try and help them in identifying areas where they can tax. One of them is something called tax farming, where in case URA can't reach there, they will act as the agents to collect the tax on behalf of URA and get a small percentage, or a percentage out of that collection. So that collaboration and cooperation between local governments and URA. We are also looking at something on property taxes, because property taxes are collected by local governments. And yet we, as central government, we have rental tax, which is almost on the same base, because you have a building, there is tax on the rent you are getting from there, and then the local governments are also asking for property tax. So we are in discussions to see how we can streamline this tax. Instead of a person having to pay twice, maybe they pay once, and then there is a revenue sharing mechanism between central government and local government. We are also looking at issues like withholding tax. Withholding tax is when a big taxpayer withholds some tax from a payment that is being made from a supplier. So this is one way of getting people who are not in the base to come forth. We have done it. Most of the taxpayers are now obliged to withhold a certain percentage. It's a 6% when there is a supply beyond 1 million shillings. That one we think will bring in more people. This is not supposed to be final, it's a provisional tax. However, of course, a lot of people do not file, and that provision becomes a final tax. We are also experiencing how we can use withholding for VAT. That, for example, when you are supposed to pay VAT, like government, if it's paying a supplier, it withholds part of that VAT and remits it to URA because there's been a leakage there. So that's an area that we are also looking at. But all this, of course, is even in the income tax. When you saw the what you are talking about, the cap on losses, that is part of the domestic revenue mobilization strategy, and all this has been studied, all of them. Then something that we are doing is the tax exemption or tax expenditure rationalization. We have a lot of tax exemptions. We have tax incentives. We have exemptions that are related to social services. We have exemptions that are related to investments. So we are trying to review these because there's a big leakage. We are losing close to 1% of GDP in these exemptions. So we are studying them with a view of removing the ones which we think are redundant. We are doing a cost-benefit analysis. And I think this coming financial year, this study, the analysis will help us in considering some of them for removal. And we think we shall be able to get good revenues there. Another area.
And Mr. Kagwa, two things that have interested me in what you've said. Accountability, you being accountable to the population,
yes,
but also the cost-benefit analysis to be able to see the taxes.
Yes.
Some of the measures you're putting there is like putting the cart before the horse. Now, why don't we put the horse before the cart and be able to speak about the impact of what taxes would do? Because then it incentivizes the population to pay their taxes.
When you look at our planning frameworks, the National Development Plan, and even our budget strategies, they really speak to what you call the horse, what we are going to do with that money. It's very, very clear. All that we are doing, the priorities that we set out to do.
Mr. Kagwa, sorry,
yes.
When you say your plan, it is, like Andrew said, it's good on paper. It's not tangible on ground. People see 10 trillion in corruption, 8.5 in exemptions for companies that close after the exemption has elapsed. So we really, what an ordinary Ugandan is looking for, tangible, hospital, Panado, school that my child, that when Ibrahim's child goes to Kitanti and my child goes to a certain school, they are at the same level when they come out to be able to get gainful employment. What impact are you driving so that people are freely giving their taxes, knowing this is what my benefit is?
Yes, the impacts, of course, that we are looking at are the outcomes eventually. When we look at this, what do we say about the outcomes? For example, if we put money in health, we would see the outcomes that there is less stunting of children. And these, when you look at the NDP and the program-based budgeting, these outcomes are clearly spelled out, and anybody can see that, yes, when we talk about education, what are the outcomes? That the children who are going to school have got ability to read, and they have ability to write, to calculate them. Yes. So all this is something that we are looking at. It's very clearly put in our planning frameworks. The last one I wanted to mention was the review of the review of the different licensing. And I wanted to give you also an example because somebody has raised it. In the hotel sector, there are many taxes. There is, of course, pay as you earn. There is income tax. Those are normal. There is VAT. There's some excise duty. Then they start with so many of these other taxes. There is a lift tax, a license for a lift, you get that. You pay a license, you pay a fee for having a swimming pool, you pay a fee for having a bar, you pay a fee for having a restaurant. It is the same establishment, and you pay a fee for having rooms, then you pay a local service tax. All these are on one establishment, and we think that is not good for business. And we are discussing, and hopefully by next financial year, we shall have rationalized most of these different licenses, because they don't help businesses to grow. We want businesses to grow, and those are going to lead, because if you have businesses growing, it's going to lead to what we are striving at, the socio-economic transformation of this country, from a peasant economy to a middle class economy, where everybody is happy, where we are adding value to the products that we're producing here, and we are using technology to solve most of our problems. Thank you.
Let me come to Ibrahim. URA is looked at as the one that cracks the whip punitive measures, slapping penalties and all these things. In all these punitive and hardness, is there a soul in URA that people can be able to relate to? Looking at all these cracking the whip, penalties, can someone be able to relate and have to pay their taxes with ease?
Thank you, Timothy. And I think it is a brilliant question under the circumstances. A lot of credit is going to go to the current administration at URA, led by Mr. John Musinguzi. And there has been a deliberate effort to put a human face to taxation. We have deliberate programs like change management to change the attitudes of our staff. Our change management program is a 4-year program. We have so far gone 2 years, and we're beginning to see results. Basically, to get away from the militaristic approach of enforcement and acquiring taxes. The slogan is that we are expected to engage, to educate, and only when things fail do you go for enforcement. And we are seeing a lot of progress through engagement and educating. We have gone ahead to basically come up with a division for staff compliance. Our staff are expected to live by a code, to live by certain integrity standards, and if anybody, a taxpayer, anybody sees a staff of URA who does not live to an acceptable practice or code, you can now report. It is the equivalent of the police standards division. So it is a fully fledged division that will investigate and will even go on to prosecute staff who probably are overzealous. All those things where somebody is giving miscellaneous or overzealous assessments, all those are part of integrity issues now in URA. I'll tell you, Timothy, in the last 2 years, we have had more than 70 staff who have had to leave the institution on integrity issues. That number will not compare even when you look 10 years back in URA. That just is a statement on how firm we are in transforming the institution at the end of the day. We have gone ahead to be able to create more engagements. For example, people who have problems today with taxes, because people will have problems, we have come up and championed alternative dispute resolution. In the past, we would go bare knuckles with any taxpayer and we would go to court, and trust me, we have had a record of winning about 80% of our cases when we go to court. But we realize that by the time you're through a court system, there's a lot of tax that is held up in courts of law. It's expensive for everybody on either side, and it's time consuming. With alternative dispute resolution, we actually get to, if first you can object. If you're not happy with an objection, then you can go for alternative dispute resolution. You sit on the table and you examine the facts and the merits of the case. Where the authority is found to be wrong, we now accept. We now accept when we're in the wrong and make amends. And equally, our taxpayers would do the same. In the last 2 years, we have been able to collect over $600 billion and $10 million through alternative dispute resolution. That is money that would have been held up in courts of law, battling all these kind of things. We have made it simple for people who have been dodging taxes, never paid taxes, but are in business, have an income, to voluntarily disclose. So we have a program of voluntary disclosure. If you come on your own, knock on our doors and say, guys, I would want to make my business right, there is not an ounce of penalty on interest you're going to pay. And you would even you would discuss a payment plan on how to manage what is owed to you in terms of principal tax. All this is to make it easy and to put a human face in terms of taxation. If you see our sector-based engagements we're going with, we work with associations today. You'll hear a lot about tax education. We are with UMA, we are with PSFU, we are with UZIA, with all these associations, the Women Entrepreneurs League and so on. What we are doing is to be able to work hand in hand with people who are good to mobilize their colleagues and friends, and we are there to support them and also do our tax education. All this is in an effort to make our services more friendly, we being more approachable, and forget all that business where our enforcement all had to be either it's an audit or it's an enforcement. So there is progress in that line, and where things do not seem to be working well, we have adopted technology to even reduce human contact. Gone are the days where every time you have to meet a URA officer for you to explain your problem. Because in that's where somebody's asking for chintu chidogo. So today, there's a lot of services that you can get. We have a WhatsApp number. Any intervention you want, if you trade our WhatsApp number, you will get a response. If it is on a question of tax, if you are whistleblowing, it is possible. We have toll-free numbers. We have a URA touch point that is managed by a customer relationship management system, in that it is tracked using service level standards, that a complaint, a query, an issue in the system is tracked how long it stays on somebody's account. Every time, if somebody doesn't work on an issue, it is escalated to their boss. In our system, everybody has a boss. At the end of the day, if something is not worked on, for example, there are hours on which an issue has to be worked on, it will be fast-tracked to your supervisor, to your manager, to your assistant commissioner, to the commissioner, even to the commissioner general. So when it comes to performance management, it is clear, because there were tickets in your system that were not worked on. Gone are the days where things just fall through the cracks in URA.
You seem to cater for the 26% that have internet penetration. But let me ask, the other one is integration. Mr. Kagwa spoke about the rationalization, all these taxes on hotel makers, but their needs, there's UBOS that has its own database, there's URA that has its own database, that when you want to pay taxes or you want to buy something, you have to bring your either utility bill. There's URSB, it has its own database. Where do we get integration, especially to be able to not have the same tax thrown at the same person?
That is a fantastic concern, Timothy, and it is a big work in progress. I'm glad that it was actually brought on this platform here. There is a project we have that is called Evolution at URA that usually paints a picture on where we want the tax service to be able to be going. And what we're looking at is coming up with an identifier that is common to all of us, especially government agencies. So it is work in progress. Because today we have seen everybody has a NIN, a national identification number. We see a future where the national identification number should be used for tax transaction, should be used for business registration, should be used for all these permits and so on, because it is something that now is a national identifier for a citizen in Uganda. And right now, it's being benchmarked. If you see what we have done with the TIN, in the past, it used to take about 2 weeks or even a month to get a TIN. And sometimes you used to hire somebody to get it for you. Why? Because you had about 80 fields you needed to fill in a spreadsheet. Today, the TIN is instant. You get it in under 3 minutes. You can do it on your phone, on your computer, and you'll get it as instant. How? We're able to interface our database with the NIRA database. So that if you have a national identification number and you put it in one of the 10 fields, all the background information that usually is already held elsewhere now in NIRA will be self-populated. So you don't have to go through that rigor. So we are hoping that we can do this with many of the agencies that actually have a stake within revenue mobilization. So it is work in progress, and we think it will change and make tax collection a little easier. So there's a lot of work going in under there, and we think that we are making good progress. We only need to be able to work better, to work with our partners, especially this financial year and the last. We are driving an agenda of collaboration and partnership, sharing data. We are using a lot of data analytics today. We are working, at least now, we have access to databases like for Umeme. These we have. We have access to databases in KCCA. We have access to databases in a number of places that is now helping us to be able to pinpoint who an actual and profile a taxpayer, so that it is just not going on a rampage and think that everybody has to be able to pay tax. So this is being helpful, and exchange of information is happening. We have economic players here who disguise their wealth. There's a Hajj in Chikubo recently who has been paying presumptive tax of 200,000 for a very long time. But through a whistleblower and out of an investigation, we realized that the stall where he sits is just a front, but he has flats that have been turned into stores, and that's where he keeps actually his merchandise. But he would disguise himself as a presumptive payer. But because of exchange of information, working closer to even other taxpayers, this is possible without we being coercive, but being able to partner and collaborate.
Thank you very much. Andrew, let me come to you. One of the biggest desires for every Ugandan is to be able to have the social services going forward. That I have a school, that we're equitable when we go to school, not just the learning and the numerals there, but that I have quality education that gives me an upper hand to get there. But also when I look at the digital tax that was put on these things, seems like it comes to the end consumer. How would we tackle this, especially to widen the tax base or broaden it, and still have people benefit from these digital platforms?
Thank you, Timothy. You know, tax is a question of legislation. Unlike, it's not a moralistic subject or an emotional subject. So today, where we are, and speaking to that, true, we need services. We need quality services. Actually, we anticipate more services as compared to what we can provide. Now, the taxes or that have to be introduced, like the digital, definitely have an effect. But what is the bigger picture? I'll tell you, Timothy, that globally, most multinational companies are all over the place. But you do not find them registered in a particular place. If I asked you to show me the office of Netflix, you might struggle in Uganda. If I asked you to show me the office of Facebook, you might struggle. But if I asked you how many people use Facebook, or how many payments are made to Facebook for those different ads. So you have a potential person or entities that should form part of your base. But because of the digitalization, because of the technology, those persons get out of your tax base. So the digital taxes and the different mechanisms on the Netflix, on the Apples, to me they are very good developments. And they're not just Uganda, by the way. Globally, from the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, even the UN, every day from 2015, they are thinking, how do we tax the digital economy? How do we make sure that such entities which are multinational, but they are not in different areas or developing countries, also contribute to those economies where they make money? Facebook has a market here, but if you asked for their tin, it might not be there. So the digital taxes are good, and for me, they are going to supplement the already existing base that we have. They're going to help, actually, the economy to grow, because then they are part of the network. And the hope is that now whatever we can collect, like my colleagues have said, it is put to good use. It can create value, and to a local person, it can translate, like Professor said. The value is there, but its real terms and translation is what might not be the point. It being expensive maybe to access data, to access the different things, for me I think you cannot have everything. And definitely as you scratch something, there are always those residues that you expect to get. So we will have pitches here and there, but that's the contribution that we make to the economy. So
and Andrew, looking at it, the tax seems to go to the end user. These multinationals might get away scot-free. Case in point, Netflix. You're taxing the end user. These multinationals are getting away with really a slap on the wrist there. How do we include that into this tax bracket and still widen our tax base without really frustrating the end user? Because there are virtual shops on Facebook, there are virtual shops on Instagram, but we are still frustrating the same business that has gotten out of rent to get into the virtual space, and you're still finding them where they are and putting a noose on their neck and saying you're going to pay.
Okay, that's very good. And I'll call that part of work in progress. Actually, what is happening now globally, and I'm sure with time we shall also pick a leaf, is if you're multinational and you have made some money in a different jurisdiction, on top of the indirect taxes, now we are saying, let's also have a percentage that you can contribute in that jurisdiction. They're what we call the minimum taxes. For example, they are proposing that if you are in a country and you make so much, let us allocate a 15%, for example, as a global minimum tax that you remit to that revenue authority where you have created value. So this is happening, and some jurisdictions have adopted. I'm so sure Uganda, we are studying, because the OECD The Base Erosion and Profit Shifting Project has made that recommendation through a two-pillar approach, what they call a Pillar 1 and a Pillar 2 approach. And we are getting there. And with time, I'm so sure those entities will be able to contribute something as a share. Uganda is part of ATAF, African Tax Administrators Forum, and the discussions are going. I think last week or two, they submitted their proposals towards having those entities contribute in form of now corporation tax, based on what they add value here.
Doctor, let me come to you. Well-studied US, but let's put it here. 53% of this informal sector is contributing. We don't know if it's equitable or it's progressive in its taxes, but I also know someone who sold his goods at 15 million shillings and there was no tax slapped on him. We also look at Netflix and all these Apples that have an office in the US, but their manufacturing is in some other country. How do we get a tax regime that fits this country, that can give us the dream we desire for as a country, both in social services and an impact to its population?
Thank you for that question. And I must say that it is a hard task to get a tax system that will generate income which is sufficient to meet all the needs while people are not complaining. Now, given the structure of our economy, I think there is need to encourage farms and small businesses to get registered and to pay modest tax. And that will require a reform. One reform could be reducing the tax rates to encourage the small farms to enroll, because if the tax rate is very high, they will always fear to be seen, and they will be under the radar for a long time. And I think that is one of the challenges to formalization. So for smaller businesses, I think Mr. Bosa gave information about the presumptive taxes. But I think the information is not well spread out to the SMEs. And then the other aspect which I would think of is how can we bring agriculture, especially the commercial part of agriculture, into the tax bracket? Because when you see the contribution to GDP, it is good. Then the other part is contribution of services to GDP. It is good. But when you look at the taxes that come out of these sectors, it is very low. So for me, I would think that it would be good to involve associations, either in agriculture or services, to help the tax authorities to register members, but without the immediate intention of taxing them, so that we understand who are these people in the informal sector. Once we have a clear understanding, then we can bring in more people into the tax bracket. So reduction in tax rates, registration of most businesses, and bringing sectors which are out of the tax bracket to be in. And the other thing is from the domestic resource mobilization strategy. I think there's need also to study the recent changes that were made to that all MDAs, all local governments, first collect their taxes and remit it to the consolidated fund. Then later they apply for it so that they can use it for service delivery. I think if you don't study that, there could be a negative impact whereby these MDAs, they get discouraged that, oh, what we are collecting is now going back to the center, and they may not provide the services they used to provide, and that can affect service delivery. And if they are directly involved, say, in supporting private sector development, cases like, say, the UNBS, the Bureau of Standards, you may find that they may not be as efficient as they should be. So I think there's really need to study some of these changes and see, are they making better progress? Are they still collecting the same amount as they used to do, or it has affected them negatively? And then for the digital economy, I think that is something that needs to be considered vis-a-vis the penetration of ICT services in the country. We find that most of the areas are not well served in terms of internet, but if they get, it is also still costly. So if we have a strategy that make ICT services easier, then possibly it would be easier to tax the services that are provided through the channels.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. A lot of feedback coming through. Professor, research and development informs you of where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
How do we, as a country, approach the taxation, even as we get progressive? How can we approach this taxation that it's impactful to the population, not even if it's not the whole population, but the big mass of the population, in what the social services they desire, but still have an equitable, fair, and progressive tax?
Thank you very much. I would like to begin by what I said earlier, the expectations of the people. And the expectations of the people are partly reinforced by what politicians said during the campaign. They promise heaven on earth, and actually people expect heaven on earth. So people have those expectations. Our tax collectors have challenges collecting the taxes because our people are informalized and they are very far. But in addition to what they said, I think what Mr. Bosa talked about, working with the local governments, I've seen many people, even in the most remote of villages, are organized. They're either organized in a circle, they're either organized in land cooperatives. I didn't know that actually they are land cooperatives until recently. And these land cooperatives are even registered by UNBS. So you have a structure of people organized, not under the authority of the local government, but they are there. I think these are some of the vehicles that URA could work with initially to just provide information. I know there are URA people in those small districts to provide information so that finally, initially people get to know. As I said, many of us are even not aware of these things. So that later on when they have to comply, they will comply on their own volition. I am not for saying those are small timers, we keep them out. I know it's expensive, but we have to explore a way. And what are some of my encouragements? During COVID-19, you saw even how those who did not have incomes were struggling to contribute because they had a cause. I remember His Excellency would read, so-and-so who is a border rider has contributed 2,000 shillings. So people were actually interested in contributing to the state if they understand the cause. So we need to work on that culture. Mr. Bosa explained a lot of things URA is doing to clean up, and we really appreciate that. I also just wanted to add one other request, something called tax refund. I remember when we were studying in the UK, even if you worked, I know there are those hours that a student was supposed to work. So if you went beyond a certain number of hours, and of course all the tax would go, but they would refund it for you because they know you're a student, you're supposed to have been taxed maximum 6 hours, but anyway, they taxed you 12 hours, so they refund. So I think if you had a system of tax refund, people would easily pay, knowing that although I've been charged 17 when my operating capital is 5, at least I will negotiate with URA and that covers me for another 3 years. Not that when something goes once, it goes. I mean, the state is not going anywhere. The state remains with us. So if we had a system, in addition to the many things they are doing of refunding, people would happily pay, knowing that if there are any excesses, we shall square off. and balance. And I think one of the other things is to know that we are working in a competitive world. I've talked to many internationals who come in and or you meet them and they say the cost of doing business in Uganda is very high. I know some of the cost is because of the other things like our kind of labor, our kind of transportation and the rest, but they also mention taxation. Because while our people, we are small timers, we don't earn much, the economists know very well that FDIs are some foreign direct investments are some of the ways of boosting up economies. So if those who have brought in their money perceive us as a very expensive destination, then we need to work on the things that make us that. Otherwise we shall remain poor, sharing poverty, and we shall all remain disgruntled. And lastly, one of the pillars of PDM is data collection. And that's supposed to be a parish-based management information system. I know it is still early days, but since we have Ministry of Finance here, these are some of the things we need to work on. We need to know how many people are here, what are they doing, who has 1 acre, who has 10 acres, who has 2 goats, who has 100 goats. Because once you have, why other countries actually beat us in taxation, especially the developed countries, is that they have all this data mapped out. So they know who they can look to, who they can look for, and so it's difficult to beat their system. So I think we need to find these things, and when we collect, then if we collect enough money, and it's, of course, if we cut down the cost of public expenditure, and it's well utilized, then people will stop complaining and asking what their tax does. The challenge is people complain what the tax does, but many of the people who are complaining are also not paying any tax. So we have expectations which are not matched by revenue, and we don't want to be heavily indebted to foreign countries. So I think let us work on growing the economy. Let us work. I know maybe URA's mandate is collecting tax, but we have Ministry of Finance. How do we grow the economy, even within all these aspects? Then we shall all pay tax. Thank you.
Let me read some of this feedback coming through. Peter, when you pay excess tax, URA doesn't refund them. I wonder why. I think that's something that Professor has spoken about. I think this is a question that I hope Bossa can respond to before we leave. If I have a piece of land and I am doing agriculture on it, do I have to pay tax? Bossa, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Currently, when we are talking about rental income, if you have any property, movable or immovable, which will include a piece of land, that you have a business activity on it, we would expect you to pay some rental income. So a piece of land, say for example, where people get sand, pile it in some place and then resell it, you'll be expected to pay some rental income. If you have a garage in a place, a washing bay, those are some of the informal economies that are happening that we have not been effectively been able to touch. But specifically for agriculture has been a problematic area for us as a tax body, because I think, remember, there was a withholding percentage that was repealed
1%.
At 1%, which had been proposed but was repealed. So agriculture actually does not actually make any really contribution to taxation. Okay. But we believe that that's a virgin area that we need to be able to explore, because today we have people who are growing forests, people who have thousands of a ranch with thousands of cattle, who slaughter cows every day, but probably do not still make a fair share of taxes. So it is still an area that needs to be studied, and probably a right approach made to be able to make sure that they pay a fair share of taxes.
Okay, just run through some of these. No one is speaking about the elephant in the room. Taxation is not a right or an obligation. We must return it, and the social contract is there. Citizens do not see quid pro quo. You are wasting your time. No government can fast track the human ingenuity. Citizens will find loopholes. Okay. Someone else says, thank you for the show. Service delivery is not worth our taxes being collected. The reason why the economy is shrinking is because people are not earning, and we are being taxed heavily for the small earnings we have, such as social media there. Darius Mohozi from Shema there. Lastly, thank you for the show. If I am a teacher, A, and I receive my salary as X, and I am taxed 51,000 for the 10 months, and then I get my arrears of 10 months, and I'm taxed 1.4. What is that? Bossa, do you want to respond to that before we close?
I didn't quite get that. is it about taxing?
Yes, arrears being taxed, and this person the earner is receiving about 510,000 in taxes. This one's arrears at 1.4 million.
I think that's a tricky principle that has has a legal precedence, where things like arrears, things like benefits are actually subjected to tax. So I know that there is a court ruling in that direction. So it has been a tricky aspect whether these should be taxed or not. But unfortunately, given our tax regime, they are taxed.
I think arrears are taxable, but the issue is how. Because when you receive arrears and maybe your sees the amount of money on your account of 5 million, there's a tendency of taking a 30% maybe out of that, instead of looking at the entire year, because tax is imposed per year. I mean annually. So there is need to readjust after the year and see how much you should have paid.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to thank Professor Sarah for coming through. Dr. John Bosco, thank you for coming through. I hope you can come back. Andrew, thank you for coming through. Ibrahim Bosa, thank you for coming through. Mr. Kagwa Moses, thank you for coming through. We'll end with this quote. You cannot deliver what you have not yet developed. From us to you, good morning.
Thank you.
This is Chilling. Don't miss a brand new season of Chilling on UBC TV.
Water, please. Can I pay with Momo?
No.
Ha. Hey, can I pay with Momo? Ha.
Here's our merchant
Oh, very good.
7 mega?
20. Can I pay with Momo?
Unfortunately, no.
Ha. Baby, let's go.
When paying with MTN Momo comes with more benefits for everyone, it just doesn't make sense not to have it.
Hello, I have come for rent.
Can I pay with Momo?
Yes, you can.
Pay or shop with MTN Momo and get cashback every week. It's free of charge. Use the Momo app or dial *165*3#.
UBC, inspiring Uganda.
This is Chilling. Don't miss a brand new season of Chilling on UBC TV.
UBC, inspiring Uganda.
presence of security operatives who are trying to prevent huge crowds from gathering at the court premises in a bid to maintain order. But supporters of opposition parties have been gathering here in solidarity with their candidates. The main opposition candidates are Atiku Abubakar of the